Andrew and I talked last week in our Bible reading video a little bit about Bible translations. We just barely touched on it, how we're both kind of reading in a different translation than we're accustomed to. And I thought it might be interesting just to talk for a couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes, about Bible translations and a little bit about it. Very brief, very simplistic. There's a lot of science and theory here, and of course, a lot of argumentation as well. But I thought it might be interesting to just chat real quick about what Bible translation is, just a little bit about it, where some of the more common translations fall on the spectrum, and maybe what they're good for, that kind of thing. So, one of the things that we need to think about when we're looking at Bible translations is to remember, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, the Bible was not written in English. It was written in Hebrew, primarily the Old Testament, with a little bit of Aramaic thrown in. And then the New Testament was written in Greek. Of course, the Jews translated the Old Testament into Greek also in around 300 BC, because of Alexander the Great. This was super helpful to help with all of these kind of translation issues and challenges that happen. But we need to remember that, number one. So it's not a one-to-one process. Languages, at least ancient languages and modern languages, they don't work like that. There's not that kind of equivalent. So translation isn't about changing God's word. It's trying to carry it across languages. And in fact, I think if you read multiple translations, you will capture a more fuller picture, the fullness of God's word, by doing that. So we need to remember that we have ancient languages to modern languages. We also need to remember that all the translations that are done are basically working from the same manuscripts. There are some minor variations with that, but they are all kind of working with the same stuff. So again, translation is hard, it's difficult. Think about punctuation, grammar, idioms, word order. I mean, Greek basically doesn't have any of that, or it doesn't have punctuation and word order. It doesn't care all that much about those things. But Greek idioms and Hebrew idioms don't necessarily translate into English, and same way as English idioms don't translate into other modern languages. And that's why when you have cultures or people who speak different languages and they learn each other's language, it's still a long process to learn those kind of cultural things. So we need to remember that. So one of the things that, of course, translators do is they have to ask the questions. Do we translate word for word? Do we try to translate the meaning? And is it the meaning of the thought? And so on. And it actually can be a pretty difficult process. So think about like a phrase like "I'm feeling blue" in English. Try to translate that into any other language, and it may not carry the meaning that it carries. You're not literally feeling the color blue. You're feeling down or sad or some other kind of thing, but that's not what blue means in other languages. And especially when you are separated by thousands of years, that can be a difficult process. So again, the question is asked: do we preserve the form of the sentence? Do we preserve the meaning of the sentence? Most translations try to do both, or sort of fall in between, and that's why we have a spectrum. We have a spectrum of translations. There's word for word translations, or a formal equivalence translation, and this would be like your King James version, which is a perfectly good translation. New American Standard Version, English Standard Version. I think that's the one I use to preach from. Andrew, I think, uses the New American Standard. Those are very closely related to the word for word translation, or word for word philosophy. They're great for study. They're great for teaching. The text is structured very similar. They're not as good for pure reading. And of course, the King James Version, while it's a fine translation, the challenge it has is it was translated 414 years ago, basically, and people don't talk like that anymore. And so now there's a number of more modern English translations, like the English Standard and others, that are very similar. They're done very similar, but they use 20th century, 21st century English instead of 17th century English. So that's one of the main reasons why we have these translations. And of course, let's be honest, money's behind it. People doing different translations to sell different Bibles. But let's not be too cynical about this whole process. There are a number of reasons to do it. There are also thought for thought translations. These are called dynamic equivalencies. And that, moves us toward the other side of the spectrum where you have word for word, then you have meaning for meaning. That's like the Christian Standard Bible. That's the one I'm actually reading from this time. So that's more in the middle. Then there's thought for thought translations, which is like the New International Version, the New Life Translation, and so on. And then you get into paraphrases. And paraphrases are not translations, they are exactly what they sound like. They are paraphrases. They're not useless. They're dangerous to read from, I think, as a pure study Bible. But if you pair one or two of those with some of the other translations that are done properly, then I think you're fine. They can be interesting. They're certainly easier to read. The NIV is probably easier to read than some of the others. The Christian Standard Bible reads a little smoother, maybe, than the New American Standard, and certainly more so than the King James, just because, again, the language challenge. So the thought for thought, the dynamic ones are maybe easier for reading. They're sometimes maybe more clear. None of these translations differ in super real ways. Again, you ask anyone, you're going to find someone that has serious problems with every translation. I don't think any of them are perfect. How does that impact Bible study? How does that impact my views on God's word? I think God's protecting his word by allowing us to have these translations. And so we have the manuscripts, and now we can look and compare and see what's going on. So, again, you have word for word, you have kind of meaning for meaning, kind of thought for thought, and you have paraphrases on the opposite end of word for word. They're all useful, but you should study and really think out of the ones maybe from the middle to the word for word side, just to be safer, if that makes sense. So an example of a paraphrase would be like the Message. The challenge with paraphrases too is they're generally written by a very, very small group of people. A lot of times they have their own agenda, so we want to be careful about that. They are good for, just sometimes saying, okay, like a commentary, what might this mean? How do other people see this? Why are there a lot of versions or translations? Language changes over time. As I said, 1611 was when the original King James was printed or translated or finished anyway. And listen, that was in wealthy people's English, and that's not what anyone speaks anymore. So it can be very difficult. The meaning of words has changed in just a few hundred years. The word conversation comes up in the King James and it doesn't mean what you think it means, and so on. There's a lot of that. It's difficult. So some of these Bibles are better for studying, some are maybe better for public reading and teaching. Some maybe are better for new Christians and some are better for more mature Christians. But all of the modern translations, and this is what I want to get at, they're all pretty decent. They're all done by teams of scholars. So not just one or two people, like large teams of scholars in those languages and translation and the whole science. There's usually multiple Christian traditions involved. So it's not, just Catholics or just Protestants or just Baptists or just Church of Christ. That'd be very rare. There are a few of those. And there's a lot of peer review. It's very academic and very scientific. So these are all pretty good and solid. They're worth reading. Which one's the best? I can't answer that question for you. The differences are usually about things like clarity. That's why we have these multiple new modern English translations or versions, because, well, we want to be clear. I preach and teach. I want to be clear. When I'm reading or studying, I can go deeper, start looking into original languages and things. But you can't do that when you're reading and teaching in public. It's very difficult. So If you can read multiple translations, that's great. Again, what I'm doing in my Bible reading is I'm reading the Christian Standard Bible for the first round, the second round, at least for the Old Testament. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's this very Jewish oriented translation of the Old Testament into English. So I figure that might offer some interesting perspective. So I'd encourage you to do that too. I would encourage you to keep reading, stick with our Bible program. We're in the, roughly the middle of Exodus. I think we will get the Ten Commandments and the reading that is to be done today. Um, again, God didn't give us his word in English, but he did give us his word in a very couple of very good, very solidly understood and known languages in Hebrew and Greek. We have a lot of manuscripts, more than any other, by far, by a million miles, any other ancient document. We have plenty of information to be confident that the translations and versions we have are good. Are there some terrible ones out there? Yes. But by and large, the quality ones are all pretty good. Thanks and have a good one.